There is a door inside you that has been sealed for a reason. Not sealed to keep you from power, not sealed to limit you, sealed because what lives on the other side of that door does not care whether you are ready. It does not wait for you to be stable. It does not check your credentials or your intentions. It does not ask whether your nervous system can hold what it is about to receive. It simply arrives, all of it, at once. And if you opened that door without knowing what you were doing, without knowing what was on the other side, without understanding the difference between lifting a veil and tearing one, then what comes through will not feel like awakening. It will feel like destruction. In 1937, a man sat down to meditate in Kashmir. He was not an amateur. He was not a spiritual tourist watching a 10-minute video and deciding to activate his pineal gland before breakfast. He had been meditating every single day for 17 years. Alone, without a master, without a guide, with the discipline of someone who had given nearly 2 decades of his life to a single question. That morning, something happened that he had been working toward for longer than most people sustain any practice at all. A roar like a waterfall, a jet of liquid light rising through the spine and flooding the brain. An instant of ecstasy so complete that it seemed like the ultimate reward for everything he had sacrificed. And then the next 12 years of his life became what he himself described as a living hell. Burning sensations throughout his body, as if something inside him had been set on fire and no one could find the source. Hallucinations that shifted between visions of terrifying beauty and absolute darkness. The inability to eat more than a few grains of food without his body convulsing in agony, brutal insomnia. Depression so deep that he floated, in his own words, between sanity and states that resembled psychosis. He sought help from every guru, every master, every holy man he could find in India, the birthplace of this very knowledge. And not one of them could help him. They had read the texts, they had spoken about Kundalini, but they had never gone through the experience themselves. He was alone, burning from the inside, without a map, and without anyone who had walked far enough ahead of him to show him the way back to solid ground. His name was Gopi Krishna. His account is documented, published, translated into 11 languages, and it is the most important warning you have never heard about the third eye, because here is what they never told you, what they never put in the 10-minute activation videos, what they never mentioned in the guided meditations that promise you will see energy fields by Thursday if you just breathe correctly and focus between your eyebrows. The third eye is not a door you open, it is a veil, and what is hidden beneath it has been concealed not as punishment, not as conspiracy, but because the human system that receives what is on the other side has to be prepared to hold it. The veil is not your enemy. The veil is the most compassionate protection you have ever been given, and the most dangerous thing you can do is tear it open before you understand what it was protecting you from. That is what this transmission is about. Not how to open the third eye, not a 7-day protocol, not a binaural frequency that will activate your pineal gland while you sleep. This is about what no one warned you was on the other side. What happens when the signal arrives and you have no protection. What the mystics who actually went through this knew that the internet has completely erased. and what it means to lift a veil instead of tearing one, because the difference between those two things is the difference between transformation and destruction. Let us begin at the surface, because the surface is where most people stop, and the surface is where the danger begins. What you have been told about the third eye is this. It is the sixth chakra, located at the point between the eyebrows. It is associated with intuition, psychic perception, clairvoyance, and inner knowing. The pineal gland in the center of the brain is its physical correlate. Ancient traditions across cultures mapped it. Modern science has found photoreceptors in the pineal gland, has found that it produces DMT, has found that it responds to light, even though it is buried deep inside the skull. The third eye is real. The anatomy is real. The chemistry is real. The traditions are real. That is the surface. And the surface is accurate as far as it goes. But there is a layer beneath that. What you were not told is that the third eye is not a single thing. It is a threshold, and every threshold has two sides. Most of the content about third eye activation focuses entirely on one side of that threshold. The side you are standing on. The side where you gain abilities, where you see more, where you perceive what others cannot, where you feel the energy of rooms and read the emotional texture of conversations and sense things before they happen. That side is real. Those experiences are real, and they are genuinely available to human consciousness. But the other side of that threshold is also real. And what lives there does not announce itself. What lives there does not wait for you to be ready. What lives there is not automatically benevolent. And the human nervous system, when it encounters that side without preparation, without grounding, without what the traditions called protection, does not always survive intact. Peel back that surface understanding and look at what is underneath. The third eye is a perceptual expansion, and perceptual expansion means exactly what it says. Your perception expands, not just the pleasant parts of perception, not just the beautiful, luminous, high-frequency parts. All of it. The full spectrum of what exists at those levels becomes available to you. And if your system is not prepared to hold the full spectrum, if your nervous system is not stable enough, if your emotional body is not grounded enough, if your ego structure is not transparent enough to let the signal pass through without distorting it, then the expansion does not feel like opening. It feels like being torn apart. This is not metaphor. This is documented clinical reality. And the documentation comes from some of the most rigorous researchers who ever studied consciousness. If this transmission is reaching a layer you have not touched before, take a moment to like this video and subscribe so these transmissions continue to find you. Now, let us go deeper. A psychiatrist named Stanislav Grof spent more than 30 years studying what he called non-ordinary states of consciousness. He trained at Charles University in Prague. He was not a mystic writing poetry about the astral plane. He was a scientist with clinical tools and a commitment to following the data wherever it led. and what he and his wife Christina observed again and again in people who were practicing consciousness expansion techniques, intense meditation, breath work, kundalini activation, was a pattern that disturbed him deeply. These people were not mentally ill. They had no prior history of psychosis. They were sincere practitioners who had opened something they were not prepared to hold. And what happened to them looked, from the outside, exactly like a psychotic break. Extreme anxiety, depersonalization, the terrifying sensation that identity itself was dissolving, uncontrollable visions, fear of going permanently insane. And the most devastating part was this: conventional psychiatry could not distinguish what was happening to them from actual mental illness. Many of them were medicated, institutionalized, treated as sick, as broken, as people whose minds had failed, when in reality, what they were going through was a transformation that had spiraled out of control because no one had told them what was on the other side of the door they had opened. Grof named this phenomenon spiritual emergency, and the name itself contains the most important warning you will ever receive about the third eye. Emergency. Not emergence. Emergency. There is a difference between a veil that is lifted and a veil that is torn. When a veil is lifted, the light comes through gradually. The eyes adjust. The system integrates. The new perception has time to become familiar before the next layer is revealed. When a veil is torn, everything comes through at once. The full intensity, the full spectrum, the full weight of what was on the other side, and the system, unprepared, ungrounded, unprotected, goes into shock. That is what happened to Gopi Krishna. That is what Grof documented in clinical settings across decades of research. That is what the internet tutorials do not tell you, because spiritual emergency does not make for compelling thumbnail text. Now let us go deeper, because the surface danger is what happens to the nervous system, but there is a layer beneath that. Let me tell you about a woman who understood this layer more precisely than almost anyone who has ever written about it. Her name was Violet Mary Firth, though history knows her by the name she chose for herself, Dion Fortune. She was born in 1890 in Wales. She was not a village mystic. She was a trained psychologist, a student of Freudian and Jungian methods, and a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. She had both intellectual rigor and formal esoteric training. She understood the architecture of the mind and the architecture of the subtle body. She was, by any measure, prepared, and she was still destroyed. The first time it happened, she was young, working at an agricultural college in England. The institution's headmistress, a woman named Dr. Lilias Hamilton, had extensive experience in occult practices acquired in India and Afghanistan, and she used something against Violet that Fortune later described as deliberate mental manipulation. The result was not subtle. Violet was left in a state of absolute objectless terror. Fear with no source, no rational cause, no story attached to it. Pure dread rising from somewhere beneath the conscious mind. Her hands sweated. Her heart pounded so hard that a piece of metal on her bed trembled. Her mind went blank, as if someone had erased it. She could not remember what had been said in the conversation. She only knew that something inside her had been broken. This resulted in a nervous breakdown that forced her to leave the institution and return to her family. Years later, with far more preparation, Fortune suffered new episodes. When she published material that revealed details about internal practices of the Golden Dawn, she was expelled by the order's leader, Moina Mathers, and according to Fortune, subjected to a sustained psychic attack. She reported experiences that were both physical and energetic. Cats appearing in unusual circumstances. A constant pressure that drained her vitality. Mental intrusions that felt like foreign thoughts arriving in her own mind. What did she do with all of this? She did not run. She did not abandon the path. She sat down and wrote one of the most important books in the Western esoteric tradition, Psychic Self-Defense, published in 1930. And the central argument of that book is the layer beneath the surface danger that no one in the activation space ever talks about. When you expand your perception, when the third eye opens, you do not only gain access to new levels of information, you become visible on those levels. And not everything that inhabits those planes is neutral. Not everything that can perceives you with indifference. Fortune was surgical about this in a way that is worth sitting with. She said that the aura, the energetic field that surrounds and interpenetrates the body, is always damaged from the inside out. Reactions of fear or desire open breaches in the field. If you can maintain genuine emotional stability, not perform calm, not spiritual bypassing, but actual grounded equanimity, the field remains coherent. But if you are emotionally fragile, if your nervous system is already dysregulated, if your ego structure is full of unprocessed wounds and unexamined desires, and then you open a perception that amplifies everything you feel, what you have created is a perfect storm. You have expanded your sensitivity before you have stabilized the system that receives the signal. You have turned up the volume before you have cleared the static. And what comes through is not clarity, it is noise. Amplified, disorienting, destabilizing noise that you cannot turn off because you do not know how you turned it on. This is the layer beneath the nervous system danger. It is the energetic layer. And beneath that, there is another layer still. Let us go there now. There is a danger that is more subtle than nervous system collapse, more subtle than energetic vulnerability, more subtle than psychic attack. It is so subtle that most people who are experiencing it are completely convinced they are not. It wears the face of awakening so convincingly that it can be years before you realize what you have been looking at. Its name is ego, and it is the most dangerous thing you will encounter on the path of third eye development, precisely because it is already inside you. Chogyam Trungpa was a Tibetan meditation master born in 1940. He was recognized as a tulku, a reincarnated master, while still a child. He fled Tibet during the Chinese invasion, arrived in the West, founded Naropa University in Colorado, the first Buddhist-inspired university in North America, and became one of the most influential spiritual teachers of the 20th century. He had seen genuine awakening. He had seen what the path looked like when it was real. and what he observed in his Western students disturbed him in a way that none of the more dramatic dangers had. They were sincere. He never doubted that. They genuinely wanted to awaken, but they were using spirituality as another vehicle for self-promotion. They accumulated practices the way someone accumulates professional credentials. They meditated to feel superior to people who did not meditate. They sought mystical experiences to have stories to tell at dinner parties. They used the language of consciousness expansion to construct a more impressive version of themselves. And the more they advanced, the more inflated they became. The ego was not being dissolved by the spiritual path. It was feeding on it. Trungpa named this spiritual materialism. And the diagnosis is devastatingly precise. The ego can convert anything for its own use, including spirituality. It transforms meditation into a personal achievement. It transforms the opening of the third eye into a trophy. It transforms mystical experience into evidence that I am special, that I am different, that I was chosen, that I see what others cannot see, that I am further along than the people around me. And here is the direct problem for anyone seeking to develop third eye perception. When that perception opens and the ego is still in control, the one interpreting what you see is not your awakened consciousness. It is your ego disguised as awakened consciousness. You begin having visions and conclude that you are receiving messages from the universe. You sense energies and decide that you are an enlightened being, surrounded by sleeping people. You start making significant life decisions based on intuitions that are, in reality, projections of your own desire to be important, to be seen, to be special. The ego does not announce this. It does not say, I am now hijacking your spiritual development for my own purposes. It says, I am awakened, I can see, I know things others do not know. And the third eye, opened without this understanding, becomes not a window into deeper reality, but a mirror that shows the ego exactly what it wants to see, dressed in the costume of cosmic truth. Pause here for a moment and drop into this honestly. Has there been a moment in your own life when you saw through an illusion you had been living inside? Something you always sensed was beneath the surface, but could not articulate until suddenly you could? Share that in the comments. What hidden layer became visible to you, and what did it cost you to see it clearly? Trungpa described 3 specific forms of spiritual materialism that function as traps along the path. The first is the materialism of form, seeking comfort, security, and the feeling of spiritual progress through external objects and experiences. Crystals, oils, retreats, special objects, sacred spaces, as if purchasing the experience were the same as living it, as if the outer form contained the inner substance. The second is the materialism of speech, using intellectual and spiritual vocabulary as a filter that separates you from direct perception. You can speak fluently about chakras, frequencies, dimensions, quantum fields, Akashic records, and you confuse this fluency with actual experience. the map becomes more real to you than the territory. And because the map is sophisticated and impressive, the ego is satisfied. It has the language of awakening without the vulnerability of actual transformation. The third, and this is the one that should make you stop and sit very still for a moment, is the materialism of mind. The constant, subtle effort of consciousness to maintain the notion that there is a solid self that is progressing spiritually. The ego wants to be the protagonist of its own awakening. It wants to be the hero of its own dissolution. And it will use every experience, every vision, every moment of genuine perception, every real encounter with the deeper layers of reality, as further evidence that it, the ego, is special, is evolved, is ahead of the curve. Trungpa said that enlightenment is the ego's ultimate disappointment, because the ego wants to be the one who becomes enlightened. And real awakening is the recognition that there is no such one. This is the layer beneath the energetic danger, the psychological layer, the layer where the most sophisticated trap lives. And it is the layer that the activation tutorials are least equipped to address, because addressing it requires something the tutorials cannot sell you. It requires honesty, uncomfortable, ego-deflating, identity-challenging honesty about why you actually want this, what you are actually seeking, what you are hoping the third eye will give you that your ordinary life has not. Let me ask you directly. When you imagine having third eye perception, what do you see yourself doing with it? What changes? What becomes possible? And is there anywhere in that vision a version of yourself that is more impressive, more capable, more special, more powerful than the people around you? If there is, that is not wrong. It is human. But it is the ego's fingerprints on the desire. And if you open the third eye with that desire driving the process, what you will see through it will be shaped by that desire. You will not see reality more clearly. You will see your own desires reflected back at you in a more elaborate costume, and you will call it awakening. This is the layer the ancient texts were most careful about. And they were careful about it in a way that has been almost completely lost in the modern conversation about third eye activation. Approximately 2,000 years ago, an Indian sage named Patanjali compiled what many scholars consider the most important treatise ever written on the practice of yoga. In the third chapter, called Vibhuti Pada, he does something that surprises even contemporary scholars. He lists in precise detail the extraordinary perceptual abilities that a practitioner can develop through sustained practice. Clairvoyance, knowledge of past and future, understanding of the language of all living beings, perception of subtle energies, access to information beyond ordinary sensory range. These are not metaphors. Patanjali is describing real capacities that he considered achievable through genuine practice. And then he does something that the modern activation industry has almost entirely erased from the conversation. He warns that these powers are the most dangerous obstacles on the path to liberation. not stepping stones, obstacles, dangers, traps. He calls them vibhutis, which is sometimes translated as powers or perfections, but the full meaning is closer to manifestations. They are manifestations of expanded perception. They are real, they are available, and they are, in Patanjali's precise assessment, the most seductive distractions that a practitioner will ever encounter, because they feel like the destination when they are actually a very compelling rest stop that, if you linger there, will keep you from ever reaching where you are actually going. The trap Patanjali identified is the same trap Trungpa identified 2,000 years later from a completely different tradition. When the perceptual abilities open, the ego rushes in to claim them, to own them, to use them as evidence of its own specialness. And the moment the ego owns the perception is no longer clear. It is filtered through the very structure that awakening is meant to dissolve. This is what the veil was protecting you from, not the experiences themselves, not the expanded perception, not the deeper layers of reality, but the encounter with those layers before the structure that would distort them has been sufficiently cleared. The veil is not a punishment. The veil is a timekeeper. It holds the deeper layers in place until the system that will receive them is ready to hold them without distortion, without ego capture, without the nervous system collapse that happens when more comes through than the container can hold. Tearing the veil open does not make you ready for what is on the other side. It just removes the protection before the readiness is there. Now let me show you something. There is a story I want to tell you about a man named Elias and a city built on ruins. Elias was an archaeologist, not the romantic kind from adventure films, the meticulous kind, the kind who spends 3 weeks carefully removing 1 inch of soil from a single square meter, because what is in that inch matters more than the dramatic reveal. He had spent his career excavating sites in the Eastern Mediterranean, and he had developed a particular philosophy about his work that his colleagues found both admirable and slightly eccentric. He refused to dig fast, not because he lacked enthusiasm. He had more enthusiasm for what lay beneath the surface than anyone on his team. But he had learned early in his career, from a mistake that had cost him something irreplaceable, that the speed of uncovering determined the condition of what was uncovered. Rush the excavation, and you damage the artifact. Damage the artifact, and you lose the information it contained. Lose the information, and the thing you spent years trying to find becomes just an object, stripped of its meaning, stripped of its context, stripped of the story that made it matter. The mistake had happened when he was young and impatient. He had found the edge of what appeared to be a significant structure, a wall or a foundation, deeper than anything else at the site. And instead of following protocol, instead of slowing down and mapping the layers carefully, he had dug fast. He wanted to see it. He wanted to know what it was. And in his hurry, he had broken through a layer that was concealing not just the structure he was looking for, but an entire sealed chamber beneath it. The chamber had been sealed for a reason. It contained organic material that had survived for centuries in the controlled environment created by that seal. The moment he broke through, air rushed in, and within hours, what had been preserved became dust. He had found something extraordinary, and he had destroyed it in the moment of finding it. he never forgot that. And from that point forward, his approach to every excavation was the same. Understand the layer you are in before you move to the next one. Map what is here before you go deeper. Never remove a layer until you understand what it has been protecting. Years later, Elias was working at a site in southern Turkey. His team had been excavating for months, and they had reached a layer that the historical records suggested might be significant. The surface had told them it was a relatively ordinary settlement from a well-documented period. The second layer had revealed something older beneath it, a different culture, a different building style, a different set of artifacts that did not fit the narrative the surface had established. The third layer had revealed something older still, and now they were at a fourth layer, and Elias had called the team to stop. Not because they had found something dangerous, but because he had noticed something that told him they were about to. The soil at this depth had a particular quality, a compaction that was not natural. It had been packed deliberately, by hands, by people who had decided that what was beneath this layer should stay beneath this layer. And Elias had learned, over decades, that when ancient people sealed something deliberately, they had a reason. Sometimes the reason was practical, sometimes it was ritual, sometimes it was protective, but the seal itself was information, and breaking it without understanding it was not archaeology, it was vandalism. He spent 2 weeks studying the sealed layer before he opened it. He mapped the edges of the seal. He analyzed the composition of the packing material. He consulted with specialists in the region's ancient cultures to understand what practices of sealing and concealment were known from this period and what they typically indicated. He built a picture of what the seal was and why it was there before he touched it. And when he finally opened it, carefully, methodically, with full understanding of what he was doing, what he found inside was intact, preserved, meaningful, not destroyed by the act of discovery. His younger colleagues asked him afterward how he had known to stop, how he had known the seal was there and that it mattered. He said, "I have been doing this long enough to know that when the ground resists you, it is not the ground being difficult. It is the ground telling you something. And the thing it is telling you is always more important than what you are in a hurry to find. And you, sitting with this transmission right now, you have been living at the surface of something with infinite depth. You have felt the resistance. You have felt the sense that there is more beneath what you can see. You have sensed the seal. And the question is not whether to go deeper. The question is whether you will go the way Elias learned to go, with understanding, with preparation, with respect for what the seal was protecting, or whether you will go the way he went when he was young and impatient, fast, hungry, certain that what you want to find is more important than the layer that has been protecting it. Because what is beneath the seal of your own perception is real. It is extraordinary. It is waiting, but it is not waiting for your enthusiasm. It is waiting for your readiness. Let us talk about what readiness actually means, because this is the layer that the activation tutorials skip entirely, and it is the most important layer of all. The ancient traditions that mapped the third eye did not begin with the third eye. Every single one of them, without exception, began somewhere else. They began with the foundation. And the foundation, in every tradition that understood what they were dealing with, was not technique. It was not breathwork. It was not visualization. It was not frequency. The foundation was character. The foundation was the quality of the inner life from which the perception would emerge. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras do not begin with the extraordinary powers of the third chapter. They begin with the yamas and niyamas, the ethical foundations, the qualities of being that must be cultivated before any expansion of perception is attempted. Non-harm, truthfulness, non-stealing, non-excess, non-possessiveness, cleanliness, contentment, discipline, self-study, surrender to something larger than the self. These are not moral rules imposed from outside. They are descriptions of the internal conditions that make the nervous system stable enough and the ego structure transparent enough to hold expanded perception without distortion and without collapse. The Taoist tradition that mapped what they called the upper cinnabar field, the energy center corresponding to the third eye, placed it within a complete system of internal cultivation that began with the lower centers, the foundations of physical vitality and emotional stability, before any work was done with the upper centers. The idea was not metaphorical. The energy that activates the upper centers has to come from somewhere. It rises from the foundation. And if the foundation is unstable, if the lower centers are depleted or dysregulated, then the energy that reaches the upper centers is not clean. It is not stable. And what opens is not a window, it is a wound. The Sufi traditions that worked with what they called the ajna center, the point of command between the eyebrows, embedded their practices within years of preparatory work. Work on the nafs, the lower self, work on the purification of the heart, work on the quality of attention itself, learning to hold awareness steady, to observe without being captured by what is observed, to be present with intensity without being overwhelmed by it. All of this before any deliberate work with the higher centers. The Hermetic tradition that Dion Fortune worked within had a similar architecture. The foundational work was not about opening perception. It was about building the container that would hold expanded perception without shattering. Building what they called the magical personality, a stable, grounded, coherent inner structure that could move through non-ordinary states without losing its center, without being swept away by what it encountered. Every tradition, every culture, every lineage that actually understood what the third eye was and what it required, every single one of them said the same thing in their own language. You do not begin with the opening, you begin with the preparation. And the preparation is not a preliminary stage you get through as quickly as possible so you can get to the interesting part. The preparation is the path. The preparation is what makes the opening safe. And the opening, when it comes from genuine readiness, is not dramatic. It is not a roar like a waterfall and a jet of liquid light. It is quiet. It is gradual. It is the natural unfolding of a perception that has been carefully cultivated in a system that was ready to hold it. Gopi Krishna's experience was dramatic precisely because he had not prepared the channels. He had cultivated the concentration. He had built the focused attention over 17 years of daily practice. But he had not worked with the energetic channels through which the awakened energy would travel. He had not cleared the pathways. He had not built the foundation of the lower centers that would support the activation of the upper ones. And when the energy moved, it moved through the wrong channel, through the Pingala, the channel associated with heat and activation and fire, instead of through the Sushumna, the central channel that carries the balanced integrated current. And the result was 12 years of burning. This is the layer beneath the preparation layer, not just the what of preparation, but the why. And the why is this: the third eye perceives what is actually there, not what you want to be there, not what your ego has constructed, not what your desires have projected, what is actually there. And what is actually there, at the levels the third eye accesses, includes everything: the beautiful and the terrifying, the luminous and the dark, the frequencies of love and the frequencies of what is not love, the dimensions of consciousness that are aligned with human flourishing and the dimensions that are not. A perception that is ready to hold this full spectrum without being overwhelmed by it, without being captured by the dark frequencies, without being seduced by the beautiful ones, into losing discernment, without the ego rushing in to claim and distort and own what is perceived. That perception is a gift. That perception is what the traditions were pointing toward. That perception is what is waiting for you beneath the veil. But a perception that opens into the full spectrum before the system is ready to hold it, before the ego is transparent enough to let the signal pass through without distortion, before the nervous system is stable enough to integrate what it receives, before the emotional body is grounded enough to remain coherent in the presence of intense energetic input. That perception is not a gift. It is what Grof documented in his clinical research. It is what Gopi Krishna lived for 12 years. It is what Dion Fortune wrote about as the most important warning she could leave for the people who would come after her. Now let us go to the deepest layer, the one that the veil has been concealing most carefully, the one that is hidden beneath the danger, beneath the preparation, beneath the ego traps, beneath the nervous system risks, beneath all of it. Because there is a reason the third eye has been so carefully guarded in every tradition that understood it. And the reason is not what most people assume. The reason is not that the knowledge is too powerful for ordinary people. That is the ego's version of the reason, the version that flatters the seeker and preserves the hierarchy of the initiated. The real reason is something much more intimate, much more personal, much more directly relevant to you sitting here right now. The third eye, when it genuinely opens, does not show you more of the world. It shows you more of yourself. And what it shows you about yourself is not the version you have been constructing and presenting and protecting. It is the version that has been hidden beneath all of that construction. The unprocessed grief, the unacknowledged fear, the desires you have not been honest about, the wounds you have been building your identity around without knowing it, the beliefs you absorbed before you were old enough to question them, that have been shaping your perception of reality ever since. This is what the traditions meant when they spoke about the purification that must precede the opening. They were not talking about moral purity in the conventional sense. They were talking about clarity. The clarity that comes from being willing to see yourself honestly. The clarity that comes from not needing the third eye to show you something impressive about yourself, because you have already done the harder work of seeing yourself clearly without it. The veil between you and the deeper layers of reality is not primarily external. It is internal. It is made of everything you are not willing to see about yourself. Every assumption you have not questioned, every wound you have not touched, every desire you have not examined, every fear you have not been honest about. The veil is your own unexamined inner life, projected outward and experienced as the limitation of perception. And this is why forcing the opening is dangerous in a way that goes deeper than nervous system collapse or energetic vulnerability or ego inflation. Forcing the opening means bypassing the very material that the opening is meant to reveal. It means reaching past the veil without clearing what the veil is made of. And what happens then is that the deeper perception arrives in a system that is still full of the distortions that the preparation was meant to clear. The signal comes through the noise. The light comes through the distortion. And what you perceive is not reality. It is your own unexamined inner life, amplified and projected onto the screen of expanded perception and experienced as external truth. This is the most sophisticated form of the trap, and it is the one that is hardest to see from inside it, because the experiences feel real. The visions feel genuine. The perceptions feel like actual information about the world, and they may be, in part, but they are mixed with the projections of an unexamined psyche in a way that is impossible to distinguish from the inside without the very clarity that the preparation was meant to build. The mystics knew this. The traditions that survived long enough to accumulate genuine wisdom about this process knew this, and they built their entire architecture of preparation around this specific danger, not to gatekeep, not to maintain hierarchy, but because they had seen again and again what happened when the opening came before the clarity, and they had seen again and again what became possible when the clarity came first. Let me give you a practice now, not a technique for opening the third eye. A practice for preparing the ground, a practice that works with the actual material of the veil rather than trying to push through it. Find a moment of stillness. You do not need to close your eyes unless you want to. You do not need a special posture or a particular environment. You just need a moment of genuine attention. Bring your awareness to something you are currently certain about, something in your life that you consider settled, fixed, known. It might be a belief about yourself, about someone in your life, about how the world works, about what you are capable of or what you are not capable of. Find something that feels solid, something you do not usually question. Now, without trying to change it or challenge it, simply ask yourself this: what is this belief protecting me from knowing? Not, is this belief true or false? Not, where did this belief come from? Just, what is it protecting? Beliefs that feel solid, that feel like facts, that feel like reality rather than interpretation, are almost always protecting something. They are sealed layers. They are veils that were put in place because what is beneath them was, at some point, too much to hold. And the practice of preparing for genuine third eye perception is not the practice of forcing those seals open. It is the practice of becoming curious about them, of becoming willing to look at the seal itself, to understand what it is and why it is there, before you decide whether to open it. This is what Elias learned in that excavation. This is what every tradition that understood the third eye was teaching in its own language. The seal is not your enemy. The seal is information, and the information it contains is always more valuable than what you were in a hurry to find beneath it. Stay with that question for a moment. What is this belief protecting me from knowing? Feel where that question lands in your body, not in your mind, in your body, because the body knows about the sealed layers before the mind does. The body has been holding them, the tension in the shoulders, the constriction in the chest, the particular quality of heaviness that lives in certain parts of the torso. These are not random physical sensations. They are the body's way of marking the locations of the sealed layers, the places where the veil is thickest, the places where the most significant material has been protected for the longest time. The preparation for genuine third eye perception begins here, not between the eyebrows, in the body, in the willingness to feel what the body has been holding, in the willingness to be curious about the sealed layers before rushing to open them. This is the practice, and it is not dramatic. It does not produce immediate visions or energetic explosions, or the sensation of a roar like a waterfall. It produces something quieter and, in the long run, far more significant. It produces the gradual clearing of the distortions through which all subsequent perception will pass. It builds the clarity that makes the opening safe. It prepares the ground. Now let us return to Gopi Krishna for a moment, because his story does not end with 12 years of hell, and the ending is the most important part. After 12 years of the burning, the hallucinations, the inability to eat or sleep normally, the oscillation between cosmic consciousness and states that resembled psychosis, something shifted. The energy, which had been traveling through the wrong channel, the channel of fire and heat and unbalanced activation, gradually found its way to the central channel, the channel of integration, the channel that carries the balanced current rather than the unilateral fire. And when it did, the experiences changed. Not because the perception became less intense, but because the system had finally, through 12 years of involuntary preparation, through being burned clean by the very energy it had unleashed, reached the state of readiness that should have preceded the opening. The container had been forged in the fire, and now it could hold what it was receiving. Gopi Krishna spent the rest of his life writing about what he had experienced and what he had understood from it. He became one of the most important voices in the 20th century on the subject of Kundalini and consciousness evolution. He wrote more than a dozen books. He corresponded with scientists, philosophers, and spiritual teachers around the world. He dedicated himself to ensuring that what had happened to him would not have to happen to others in the same way. The central message of everything he wrote, the message that runs through all of it like the central channel he had finally found, was this: consciousness, evolution is real. The expansion of human perception is real. The third eye is real, and it is available, but it requires preparation, not as a gate to keep you out, as a structure to hold you in, to hold you coherent, integrated, and functional as the perception expands, to ensure that the expansion is a gift rather than a destruction. He did not say, "Do not open the third eye." He said, "Do not open it the way I did. Do not open it in isolation, without guidance, without preparation, without understanding what you are asking your nervous system and your energy body and your psyche to hold. Do not open it in a hurry. Do not open it with the ego's desire for power or specialness driving the process. Open it the way the traditions intended it to be opened, gradually, carefully, with the foundation built first, with the channels prepared, with the ego examined rather than inflated, with the body grounded and the emotional life integrated, and the inner life honest enough to hold what the opening will reveal. That is the real teaching hidden beneath the story that begins with a roar like a waterfall and a jet of liquid light. Let us go to another layer. Because we have been talking about the dangers of opening the third eye. But there is a layer beneath the danger that is more important than the danger itself. And it is this: the third eye is not the goal. It never was. In every tradition that understood it, the third eye was a means, a capacity, a tool of perception in service of something larger than perception itself. And the something larger was always the same, expressed in different languages by different traditions across thousands of years of human inquiry into the nature of consciousness. The something larger was liberation, not liberation as a spiritual concept to be discussed at retreats. Liberation as a lived reality, the actual experiential freedom from the structures of conditioned perception that keep you experiencing a thin slice of reality and calling it the whole thing. The freedom from the ego's constant narration about who you are and what is real and what is possible and what you are worth. The freedom from the collective agreement about the nature of reality that has been passed down through generations and absorbed so completely that it feels like fact rather than interpretation. The third eye, in its genuine function, is not a tool for seeing entities or reading auras or knowing the future or perceiving energy fields. Those things may be byproducts of its development. But the function, the actual function that the traditions were pointing toward, is the perception of reality as it actually is, rather than as the conditioned mind has been taught to see it. And what reality actually is, at the level the third eye accesses, is not what the activation tutorials promise. It is not a world populated by beautiful light beings and cosmic messages and evidence that you are special and chosen and more evolved than the people around you. It is something far more radical than that. It is the direct perception of the nature of your own awareness, the recognition that what you have been calling yourself is a construction, a useful construction, a necessary construction for navigating the world, but a construction nonetheless. Not the fundamental reality, but a layer of interpretation laid over something that has no edges, no fixed identity, no separation from the field of consciousness in which it arises. This recognition is what the traditions called awakening. And it is not comfortable, at least not initially, because the ego, which has been running the show, does not receive this information with equanimity. It fights. It argues. It produces very convincing evidence that it is real and solid and important, and that any suggestion to the contrary is dangerous or delusional. And the third eye, in its genuine function, is the capacity to perceive clearly enough to see through that argument, to see the construction for what it is, not to destroy it, not to transcend it in some dissociated way that leaves you unable to function in the world, but to hold it lightly, to use it without being used by it, to be in the world of form while knowing, directly and experientially, that the form is not the whole of what you are. This is what the veil is protecting. Not the experience of expanded perception, not the ability to see more, but the recognition of what you fundamentally are beneath all the layers of conditioning and construction and identity that have been built up over a lifetime of being told what is real. The veil is thin, it has always been thin. What you are beneath it has never been absent. It has been here, beneath every experience you have ever had, waiting not for you to force your way through to it, but for your awareness to become still enough, clear enough, honest enough to recognize what was always already here. And the path to that recognition is not the path of forced opening. It is the path of genuine preparation, the path that begins not with the technique, but with the question of what you are actually seeking, what you are hoping this will give you, what you are willing to see about yourself in the process, what you are willing to release in exchange for what is on the other side of the veil. Because the veil does not dissolve in response to technique, it dissolves in response to readiness. And readiness is not a state you achieve by doing the right practices. It is a state you grow into by being willing to look honestly at what the practices are revealing, by being willing to sit with the sealed layers and understand them before opening them, by being willing to let the ego's desire for specialness and power be seen for what it is, without judgment, without shame, but with the clear-eyed honesty that is the actual foundation of genuine perception. Something is surfacing in you right now as we move through these layers together. A pattern you have sensed, but perhaps never named. a truth that was hidden in plain sight until this moment made it visible. What is it? Share it below. What hidden layer became accessible to you during this transmission that you could not quite reach before? Let me tell you about one more layer, the deepest one we will reach in this transmission. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there is a teaching about what happens in the moment of death. The Bardo Thodol, known in the West as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, describes the experience of consciousness as it moves through the transition between one form of existence and another. And the teaching at the center of that text is this: in the moment of death, the fundamental nature of consciousness is revealed. The primordial light, the clear light of awareness that underlies all experience, becomes directly visible. And the question that determines everything about what happens next is whether the consciousness recognizes what it is seeing. If it recognizes the clear light as its own fundamental nature, liberation occurs. The construction of a separate self dissolves into what it always was, which is the field of awareness itself. If it does not recognize it, if it is startled by the intensity of what is revealed, if the ego rushes in to interpret and claim and make sense of what it is seeing, the consciousness turns away from the light and moves back into the realm of constructed experience. The Tibetan teachers use this teaching not only to prepare people for death, but to illuminate the nature of the third eye and its development in life. Because what they were describing is not only what happens at death, it is what happens every time the veil thins, every time the deeper layers become visible, every time the clear light of fundamental awareness begins to come through. The question is always the same. Can you recognize what you are seeing? Can you remain present with the intensity of what is revealed without turning away? Without the ego rushing in to claim it, without the nervous system going into shock, without the fear of dissolution driving you back to the surface? And the answer to that question depends entirely on what you have built in the years and months and days before the moment of revelation. It depends on the quality of your preparation, on the stability of your foundation, on the transparency of your ego structure, on the honesty of your inner life, on the groundedness of your body, on the integration of your emotional experience, on all of the things that the traditions placed before the technique, not as obstacles to the opening, but as the conditions that make the opening a recognition rather than a shock. This is the deepest layer, the recognition, not the experience of expanded perception, not the visions or the energies or the abilities, the recognition of what you fundamentally are, beneath all of it. The recognition that was always available, always waiting, always just beneath the surface of the ordinary moment, concealed not by any external force, but by the density of the construction that has been built over it. And the path to that recognition is not the path of forcing the veil open. It is the path of becoming so honest, so clear, so genuinely present with what is actually here, that the veil dissolves on its own. Not because you pushed through it, but because you became the kind of awareness that veils cannot hold. This is what the traditions were pointing toward. This is what Gopi Krishna eventually found after 12 years of burning. This is what Dion Fortune was protecting when she wrote her Manual of Psychic Self-Defense. This is what Trungpa was trying to preserve when he named the ego's most sophisticated trap. This is what Patanjali was warning about when he called the extraordinary powers the most dangerous obstacles on the path. They were all pointing at the same thing. The recognition that is waiting beneath every layer you have been shown today. The recognition that does not require a technique because it is not an achievement. It is a return to what you have always been beneath, all the layers of what you have been told you are. The veil is not between you and something you do not have. The veil is between you and the recognition of what you already are, and it dissolves not in response to force, but in response to the quality of attention you bring to it, the quality of honesty, the quality of genuine willingness to see, not what you want to see, not what would make the ego feel special and powerful and chosen, but what is actually here. What is actually here is more extraordinary than anything the activation tutorials have promised you. More extraordinary than visions or abilities or the perception of energies. What is actually here, beneath every layer, is the awareness that is reading these words right now. The awareness that has been present through every experience you have ever had. The awareness that was here before you learned your name, before you learned what reality was supposed to look like, before the veil of conditioned perception settled into place and began to feel like the whole truth. That awareness is the third eye in its deepest sense, not a gland, not a chakra, not a perceptual ability to be activated by technique. The awareness that is already here, already awake, already seeing, already knowing, already free. The only thing that conceals it is the density of everything that has been layered over it. And the path of genuine third eye development is not the path of adding more layers of technique and experience and special perception on top of all of that. It is the path of removing what is unnecessary, clearing what is distorting, becoming honest about what is actually here beneath all the construction. This is the path that is safe. This is the path that the traditions were protecting when they built all of their careful architecture of preparation and foundation and ethical cultivation and ego examination. Not to gatekeep, not to maintain hierarchy, but because they knew that the recognition, when it comes, is not something you can handle with force. It is something you have to be ready to receive. And readiness is built not in a week of binaural frequencies, but in the patient, honest, unglamorous work of becoming clear. You have felt something today. Something that is not about the excitement of expanded perception. Something quieter and more fundamental than that. Something that lands not in the head, but somewhere deeper. The recognition that the veil is real, and that what is on the other side is real, and that the path to what is on the other side runs not through force, but through honesty. Not through technique, but through genuine preparation. Not through the ego's desire for specialness, but through the willingness to let that desire be seen and understood and gently set aside. That feeling is the beginning, not the beginning of a technique, the beginning of the actual path, the path that the traditions mapped and protected and passed down through thousands of years of genuine inquiry into the nature of consciousness. The path that begins not with the opening, but with the preparation. Not with the destination, but with the foundation. Not with what you want to see, but with the willingness to see clearly. The third eye is not a door you force open. It is a veil that dissolves when you are ready. And you become ready not by trying harder or meditating more intensely or finding the right frequency. You become ready by becoming honest, by becoming still, by becoming willing to look at the sealed layers of your own inner life with curiosity rather than fear, by becoming the kind of awareness that veils cannot hold. That readiness is building in you right now. It has been building through this entire transmission. Every layer we have peeled back together has been preparing the ground. Every question we have sat with has been doing the work that no technique can do. The work of genuine preparation. The work of becoming clear. The veil is thinner than you think. It has always been thinner than you think. And now you are beginning to understand not just that it is thin, but why it is there, and what it means to approach it with the respect and the honesty and the genuine readiness that transforms the crossing from a tearing into a dissolving. What has been revealed in this transmission cannot be re-hidden. You know now what the activation tutorials never told you. You know that the danger is real, and that it is not a reason to turn away from the path, but a reason to walk it more carefully. You know that the preparation is not preliminary. It is the path. You know that the ego's desire for power and specialness is the most sophisticated trap on the journey, and that seeing it clearly is itself a form of awakening. You know that the veil is not your enemy. It is the most compassionate protection you have ever been given. And you know that it dissolves not in response to force, but in response to readiness. You are no longer approaching this as a surface dweller looking for a technique. You are approaching it as someone who understands the depth of what they are working with. Someone who is willing to do the real work. Someone who has begun to understand what the real work actually is. Welcome to what was always beneath everything. Now, before you move forward from this transmission, I want to ask you something directly. In the comments below, share this. What sealed layer did you become aware of during this transmission? What belief, what assumption, what sealed part of your own inner life did you feel the question land in? Not what you think you should say, what you actually felt, what you actually noticed. The community that gathers around this work is a community of people who are willing to look honestly at what is actually here. And your honesty is not only valuable for you, it is valuable for everyone who is on this path alongside you. If this transmission reached a layer you had not touched before, consider returning to it in a moment of genuine stillness, in the quiet of early morning or in the space before sleep, when the surface noise is lowest and these deeper layers are most accessible. And if someone in your life is standing at the edge of this same threshold, sensing the seal but unable to name it, share this with them. When you give someone access to a layer they could sense but could not reach alone, the veil does not just thin for them, it thins for both of you. Two fields of awareness meeting at the same depth create something neither could reach separately. If you want to continue going deeper, if you want to keep peeling back the layers that have been concealing what has always been here, stay close to this work. Every transmission goes deeper than the last. Every layer revealed becomes the new surface to be peeled back further. This is not a destination, it is a direction. And the direction is always the same, deeper, beneath the surface, toward the recognition that has been waiting beneath everything. The veil is thinner than you think, and now you know why it was there. And now you know what it means to approach it with the respect and the readiness that transforms the crossing from a danger into a gift. What was always beneath everything is still there. It has not moved, it has not hidden, it has been waiting with the patience of something that knows it is inevitable. Because it is, the recognition is inevitable. The question is only how you arrive at it, whether you arrive burned and broken by the force of a tearing, or whether you arrive clear and grounded and ready, having built the foundation that allows the veil to dissolve gently, like fog clearing to reveal a landscape that was always there, that was always exactly this vast, that was always exactly this close. You are closer than you think. You have always been closer than you think. The work you do now, the honest, unglamorous, patient work of preparation, is not delaying the recognition. It is making the recognition possible. It is making you the kind of awareness that can hold what is on the other side without shattering, without turning away, without the ego rushing in to claim and distort and own what is finally, after all of this, simply and completely seen. That is the gift. That is what was hidden beneath every layer of this transmission. Not a technique, not a power, not an ability. The recognition of what you already are, waiting patiently beneath everything you have been told you are, thinner than the veil that has been concealing it, closer than the breath that is moving through you right now. The veil dissolves, and what was always beneath it is here. What you have just touched in this transmission goes even further in the video on the hidden architecture beneath your reality. That exploration reveals the structural layers underneath ordinary perception itself, the framework that has been organizing your experience of the world before you ever had the awareness to question it. Watch it next.